If Max is not worried about government regulation and interference in Bitcoin, please explain why.
Right, because first of all, there's nothing the government can do to stop Bitcoin. So there's no way to regulate Bitcoin. And that's what the governments are finding out. They would love to regulate it and they would love to stop it. But so far, they've been unsuccessful because the computational power that runs Bitcoin, running at about 160 quintillion calculations per second, is beyond the reach of any government or any group of governments. So it's achieved escape velocity. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, if governments really wanted to, they may have been able to thwart Bitcoin. But now it's too late. It's simply escape velocity has been achieved, and there's nothing any government can do. Number one. Number two, you've got people inside government that are now pro Bitcoin. So you've got a senator from Wyoming, for example, who is absolutely pro Bitcoin, who's lobbying for Bitcoin, who wants to change the state of Wyoming to be a Bitcoin state. They've got a Bitcoin bank, and they want to compete with Delaware. They want to compete with other states. So you've got on the senatorial level, Bitcoin is making inroads. You've got people in Congress, in the Senate, who own Bitcoin, who are not going to fight Bitcoin because they would benefit by owning Bitcoin. They love Bitcoin. It's a fifth column working inside the government. So they're not motivated to stop Bitcoin. Number four, what is more likely is that in the next couple of years, the government, the U.S. government, the IRS will come to Bitcoiners and say, hey, Bitcoiners, we'll give you a 90% discount on your taxes if you pay us in Bitcoin. Because the government's going to be woefully underrepresented in Bitcoin, as other countries around the world are racing ahead and they're accumulating Bitcoin and they're mining Bitcoin. So America right now is not even entered the hash war or hash race or Bitcoin race with these other countries. Remember, in the 1960s, America entered the space race to compete with the Soviet Union to get into outer space, and there was that Sputnik moment. But America hasn't had their Bitcoin moment yet. We're still letting these other countries around the world grab the brass ring, to grab the momentum, and to now moving ahead of the U.S. There's a possibility, for example, Iran could be the richest country in the world because it's aggressively mining Bitcoin and accumulating Bitcoin right now. Does the U.S. want that to be the outcome? Well, if they don't start moving now and start accumulating Bitcoin, then that's the outcome. So hello, third world status. Goodbye, American century. Goodbye, U.S. dollar. So the more likely outcome is that the government is not regulating Bitcoin so much as they need to accumulate. They're gonna set an industrial policy where it's going to be we're going to subsidize energy and we're going to mine and accumulate Bitcoin because we want to be number one. If they don't want to be number one, America, then step aside and let some other country be number one because you're too fat and lazy. Get the fuck out of the way.
Okay, let's try and get some other questions in here. Okay, George Ruiz asks, what is the biggest Bitcoin correction that Max expects in 2021? Does he notice any correction patterns?
The corrections in Bitcoin have been successfully getting less and less and less. I mean, I've went through 80 to 90% corrections, in Bitcoin since 2011. So, but since then we've had less and less and less. So we just experienced a 20% correction. And so now that correction's over and now we start going higher. And so it'll start to behave more like an asset class where you might see 10 to 20% corrections. The 30, 40, 50% corrections, I think we're past that because the size of the market's gotten to be a lot bigger and the amount of money on the sidelines waiting to get in is enormous. The biggest money funds in the world, BlackRock, Stan Druckenmiller, Paul Tudor Jones, Mass Mutual Insurance Company, they're all sitting on the bid, hoping to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. And that's only going to get bigger and bigger. Sovereign wealth funds are going to get into this, et cetera. So the corrections will be less and less and less.
Okay, I like this one a lot. At Resnoir Applebee's writes, Nigel Farage recently supported Bitcoin. How does Max view political support, and does he see Bitcoin becoming a right versus left issue? Really good question.
Bitcoin is not right or left. It's on its own vector. It's on its own path. And it, as I said, it disintermediates the nation state. So you don't need politicians. You don't need politicians. You don't need right or left. You just have the hardest money asset in the world, and you're free to trade with anybody. And this is the thing. Fiat money promotes war. Paul Krugman over at the New York Times said that the U.S. dollar is backed with men with guns. You know, he admitted in the New York Times that the U.S. dollar fosters violence. It's backed by violence. It's terrorism in a little slip of paper. The U.S. dollar is a terrorist note. This essentially is backed by financial terrorism, whereas Bitcoin is peace. So if I want to get some Bitcoin from you, I have to offer you something that you're willing to take and trade for Bitcoin. So there's no coercion because it's unconfiscatable. You know, I cannot confiscate or coerce the Bitcoin out of you. So I can only get it through peaceful trade. So that hopefully appeals to the angels of our better nature, us as humans, and we move away from this violence and the paper money and the fiat money and the U.S. foreign policy and the politicians that love violence. They live on violence. We don't want that anymore. We want peace. We want Bitcoin.
Okay. Ask Max if he's ever going to sell his Bitcoin. So what would it take for Max Keiser to sell his Bitcoin? And this is a personal question, but came up a lot. The people want to know how much Bitcoin you own.
Well, I'm probably not going to sell my Bitcoin. I'm going to pass it on to the next generation. I think I have a responsibility to do that. And number two, I wouldn't want to sell Bitcoin back into fiat and give power peace, turn peace back into war. So, and I'm not motivated in any way to sell any Bitcoin. The more I hold, the hodler, I keep going hodling Bitcoin. The faster the revolution happens away from war, and we enter a peace. An era of peace. You know, the thing about that holds humans back is something that's a vestige from our days, hundreds of thousands of years ago. You know, hard-coded in our mind is this instinct toward fear, and that's what holds us back. Bitcoin gets rid of our fears and replaces it with love. And with a pure love in our hearts and our minds, we can move on to some different evolutionary step of greater good. And that's what we need to do. So I wouldn't want to put the Bitcoin I have back into fiat money circulation to feed, and then somebody in Washington will turn that into a bomb, and they'll go kill somebody in a foreign country because they're sadists. I don't want that. You know, we got a bunch of sadists running this country, and and they run by fiat money. Every time they kill 100,000 people, they go print more money. It's disgusting.
And how much, you own? I understand why you wouldn't want to disclose that, but is there a range you could share?
Well, I mean, I started buying it at $1, and that was 10 years ago. So, there's a lot of zeros.
All right.